How can civic learning shape not only what we know, but how we lead? SNF Agora Institute Director Hahrie moderates a discussion with Hoover Distinguished Fellow Jim Mattis, educator Sharon McMahon, and State University of New York Chancellor John B. King, each sharing how civic values have guided their lives and careers. Drawing on his 43 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, General Mattis speaks about the essential principle of civilian control of the military, the importance of keeping political bias out of military service, and the broader value of public service. King emphasizes the vital role public higher education plays in strengthening democracy. He outlines efforts across SUNY's 64 campuses to advance civic education, stressing that campuses must model both free expression and mutual respect, preparing students to become informed, engaged citizens. McMahon highlights the need to understand the complexity of historical figures, recognizing both their contributions to freedom and the contradictions they embodied. Together, their stories and insights remind us, civic learning is not just academic, it's a lifelong practice.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited for this conversation. We have terrific speakers here. I think what we wanted to do is, with the speakers that we have, kind of consider the question about what these big ideas that we've been talking about this morning, what they look like in practice. And we have the incredible opportunity to hear about how this kind of pluralistic civic learning that we've been talking about this morning plays out in a variety of different contexts, from the military to in public discussions on different kind of public forums online, and within higher education with John here. And so I think that what we thought that we would do is start by just having a conversation about the experience that each of our speakers have had putting civic learning into practice in different domains within which they work. And then from there, we're going to launch into a discussion of some of the challenges and the opportunities of what this looks like when we get into the nitty-gritty on the ground. And so I'm going to, and John, I'm so sorry that you can't be here in person. I know that we really wanted to have you with us, but I think what I was going to do is start by inviting Jim and Sharon to share with us a little bit about the work that they've done. And then John will give you a chance to share your work. And then from there, I think we'll have a lot of rich fodder to dive into the discussion. So Jim, maybe I'll turn to you first.
All right. Well, thank you, Hahrie. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a labor of love to be here on this subject, as I'm sure it is for you, or you wouldn't be here. I'm going to speak to this from a military perspective, and I actually disciplined myself to write things down because otherwise I could go on for hours about this, because it's so essential to military service if you want your democracy to be defended but not policed by our military. It's absolutely essential. It starts on the very first day when you swear in, when you swear to support and defend the Constitution. It begins then on your first day at boot camp. I still remember watching as the clock took 40 seconds to give me a haircut that would even make President Kim of North Korea look like a well-coiffed man. And as I was watching that, I noticed some pictures on the wall, and there was the president. Makes sense. He has something to do with the military, the elected commander-in-chief. Then the Secretary of Defense. I was in the Marines, so there was the Secretary of the Navy, and they're all wearing suits like this. And underneath it is the 4-star Commandant of the Marine Corps, the commander, the general of the base, and the colonel who commanded the unit that I was reporting to for basic training, for officer candidate school, actually. And so right away, you're getting an education. In the military, it's more of a work-study program than a study-work program. Gunnery sergeants have a one-way view of the world, and you're ill-advised to cross that, and it has to do with the survival of this great big experiment we call America. I would tell you, too, that there's a sense that we have no ordained right to this democracy that's drilled into you. In other words, if you want this democracy to survive, well, that assumes it's valuable to everybody who's there, then you're going to have to be very, very good at your job. And on one occasion, when my performance on a rainy, cold field problem was not up to snuff, I was accused of being a communist saboteur sent in to destroy the democracy of the United States of America. You can imagine how many push-ups I did that night to make up for it. It is explained as an unlimited liability. Why do I emphasize this on civic education? Because when you're going to put your life on the line for something and it's brought home to you, then that really emphasizes the importance. And by the way, it's not an insurance company, and I was in the Marine Infantry, so it's brought home to you very early by the veterans who are there, the grim nature of your job. And I would point out that that very dignity of danger means you look at the people beside you with a certain degree of respect wherever they came from in our pluralistic society. It's heavy emphasis on history. And why is that? Because we're trying to teach very, very young people, in my case it was all young men, infantry, infant soldier, that's how they get their name, that we're not going to ask anything of them that hasn't been asked of troops in the past to defend this experiment. It builds their confidence, it builds a certain value system by doing that. There are some expectations, some we speak about in the military, some that are just kind of in our DNA. One of those expectations is we have to assume that the people coming in have little to no civic education. I know that's a damnation of our education system. I think it's gotten worse. I was in the military for 43 years. As my Army buddies put it, I was a very slow learner and a very dumb draft dodger joining the Marine Infantry to get out of the Army. But over those years, I noticed we had more and more concerns about it in the military, about what was coming in. I heard it when I first came in occasionally. Today, it's a common discussion with senior officers, senior sergeants, senior petty officers. I would tell you too that it manifests in very telling ways, because when they swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution, if you ask them how many have read it, it's usually 0, and they do not know the difference between that and the Declaration of Independence. So it gives you an idea of just how big the gap is between what we need, and I'll explain why in a moment, in terms of a civic education, and what we then have to fill in as the gap. There is some of the polarization coming in, not too much with real young people, frankly, but some of what Benjamin led off with in the last panel, we do get some of that as well. Further, immigrants and children of immigrant families will be overrepresented over native-born. Why is it? There's an attitude of gratitude about being there. There's a sense of responsibility. I often have wondered, I don't have any data to back this up, that perhaps it has something to do with the naturalization oath. In other words, the education that is in their family. Another point is that 80% of the young people joining today have a mother or a father, a sister or a brother in the military, which says something that those who know the military best are willing to represent it. It's become a family business, but it also shows in some cases that the DoD education system may have a little more effort into the patriotism or the civic education arena. I'm not sure. But 250 years, here's an expectation. For 250 years, that military has not once been a danger to civilian control of our government. Now that is not normal. The Founding Fathers, thank you, but the Founding Fathers were worried about this. You see it in the Federalist Papers. Would this become a threat to our government? And one time it was nascent, it was nipped in the bud by a general named George Washington. It's before we had a constitution, when the Revolutionary Army was encouraged in Newburgh, New York, because the Congress, the Continental Congress, was admittedly violating a promise to the Army, and a young lieutenant colonel named Alexander Hamilton encouraged them to take on the Congress. And George Washington heard about it, rode up to Newburgh. This is during the period when the British have agreed to give us our independence, but they haven't shipped out for England yet. And he made very clear something that lives on in probably more specific words today than even when George Washington went there and said, an army is a dangerous institution to play with. And those words are, the President and the Congress of the United States have the right to be wrong, and the military will maintain its obedience to the President, the duly elected president and the Congress. And that is why, that is the actual fundamental civic education that is embedded inside the military that keeps us on the right track. And so you say, well, in a divided society, how do we look at social cohesion and its role? Let me tell you, I'll give you one good look at it. I was in a fight. I had the opportunity, privilege to fight many times for America, and I watched my Marines go into an enemy unit that did not have unit cohesion, and it showed up right away. As they worked their way through it faster than a hot knife through butter, I saw it played out before my eyes what would happen in our pluralistic society if people didn't have a common set of beliefs that drew them together and said, I'm even willing to put my life on the line for this. And as I watched it unfold, it was almost sickening to watch, but it also holds units together under a lot of stress. And when you talk about e pluribus unum, it's on the coins in our pocket. Out of many one, there's no place where it'll be audited more harshly and more cruelly than on a battlefield. Do you really believe in one another? Do you really trust in one another? And so the diversity in our recruiting is widespread. We go all over the country. There are parts of the country, frankly, we could pretty much shut down recruiting efforts with no impact. There's so few joining. There's little support in the communities. There's other parts that fortunately make up for that generally. But the bottom line is, once inside the military, you want unity of effort. Diversity coming in, unity of purpose. We get the behavior we reward, and we reward selflessness. They are brought up on military stories about valor. And what that generally is putting your life on the line for your buddies, because that's how it manifests in a unit where social cohesion built on an understanding that you're there for a larger purpose. You're not there for yourself. You're there to turn over this experiment in good shape to the next generation. It's built on the idea that the country is like a bank. If you want to take something out, you want to take advantage of the freedom, you owe them something that has to be put in, and there it's body, mind, and spirit. It's physically demanding, it's uncomfortable, even dangerous. It's mentally taxing, where you're expected to be more cunning than the enemy. And spiritually, you have to have a shock absorber in you, because some tragic things are going to happen in the grim pursuit of protecting this country. The officers and senior NCOs are often in a role of loco parentis, and they're teaching, but it's not always just junior people. I remember as a colonel, I was the executive secretary for the Secretary of Defense. We had a turnover, one Secretary of Defense to another. And I went in with what's called the orders book. And I brought it in, and I said, the Secretary has to go through this, and it comes in every week and has to sign off on it. And he said, what do you mean? And he's looking at this thick thing. And I said, not one ship sails, not one Air Force squadron deploys, not one Army brigade goes anywhere, not one doctor from the Navy goes into East Africa because a new disease has come out without a Secretary of Defense, civilian secretary, signing off on it. That's civilian control of the military. In other words, we even have civilians, ladies and gentlemen, who have to be schooled at high levels. These were not unsophisticated people. These were people with advanced degrees. They'd worked in government. And even they are sometimes surprised at what civic education looks like in practice in the military. I would also tell you that when we send people home, General Sherman, for example, sent his undefeated Western Army home after the Civil War with the words that, as you've been good soldiers, I am confident you will be good citizens. In the Marine Corps, our primary manual that teaches us what is expected of us says that we will create Marines who can fight battles and win them and return citizens better equipped to be citizens in the society. That's written right into the Marine Corps manual that guides everything that we do. I think too, I want to get through this quickly because I'm really eager to hear what Sharon and the Chancellor have. We do try to keep political bias out. We call them orders, not likes. We don't care if you like it or not. You know, that's not the deal. It's an order. You will do this. And with the president and who's the elected commander-in-chief, they will be obeyed. I'll give you an example. February 1st, 1865, President Lincoln sends a one-sentence telegram to Lieutenant General Grant, commanding all U.S. armies in the field in our Civil War. He's just come through a very difficult election. The guy running against him wanted to surrender and have the country break in two, no more war. He's won the election. He's being inaugurated here shortly. And he sends this telegram to General Grant, and he says, let nothing which is politically transpiring delay or hinder your military operations and planning. In other words, he knew even a lieutenant general could get distracted by the political polarization in the country. And this war had dragged on for years. The country was sick of it. It had to be ended. And he's telling him, get back to work. And what does President Grant, a few years later, retired from being the president, what does he say was the biggest interference for his officers in the Civil War? It wasn't that they didn't have military training. It wasn't that he had too much artillery or too little cavalry or anything. He said, what interfered most with my officers was a political bias. He said, that is fatal to a soldier. And President Grant knew something about the word fatal. He knew what it meant. So it gives you an idea why what Sharon and the Chancellor are going to talk about is so critical for our for the military. And let me just close with a criticism. We'll have Governor Cox here this afternoon, a political leader who takes responsibility for civic education, but there's not many. How many of us in this room have ever heard President Obama, President Trump, or President Biden, it's not a partisan statement, say, Uncle Sam needs you? I don't care if it's in the Peace Corps or the Marine Corps, in the Foreign Service or the Intelligence Service, in government service of any kind. How much do we actually laud and commend government service anymore? It's a question I'll leave with you. Back over to you, Hahrie.
Thank you. There's so much there to dig into. I want to get back to this question I think that you put on the table about how civics education is sort of a vehicle for creating a social fabric that knits us all together. Certainly within the military, but within society more broadly. But Sharon, I feel like you've done more work than almost anyone I know to make it exciting for people outside the classroom and in lots of different domains. And so I would love to hear you maybe describe a little bit your work and some of your thoughts. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your service. My father was in the Marine Corps.
Oh, you have great DNA.
Yeah, clearly. And he did a couple of tours in Vietnam and then later died from his war-related injuries. So my dad was a disabled veteran. I care a lot about this topic. But I started out my career as a high school teacher, teaching the subjects who really didn't want to be there, a graduation requirement class on government. And one of the tools that I found that was especially helpful when you're learning about something that's boring, like the legislative branch, was
so
humor.
exciting. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Right. So I'm from Minnesota, and I grew up there and moved away, lived in DC, lived in the Bay Area. But there is almost nothing more interesting to a group of 16-year-olds than a Minnesota accent. Okay, if you can be like, so today we're talking about the legislative branch. Okay, pay attention. This is much more interesting than just a lecture of like, let's get to the PowerPoint, slide 1, legislative, Latin root word. That's not nearly as interesting, right? So some of this has to do with this idea that learning about civics, and this conference is perhaps, has a lot of incredible speakers, a lot of incredible thoughts, but is operating at a very high level, which I appreciate. I've been to college, I get it. But I also think that for the general public, this can be a topic that is viewed as boring, right? This can be a topic that is viewed as like, oh, great, a 12-week class on budgeting for government. That seems not particularly exciting, especially in an era where there is so much competing for your time. So one of the things that I have found that I just have like a little sweet spot in is bringing sort of a liveliness and perhaps a sense of humor to this topic that maybe you're not getting in a semester of college, or that maybe you're not getting in the military, which that's fine. That's fine. We have different jobs.
We're a grim outfit.
Yeah, we have different jobs. But I think that is one place that I've had success, is teaching outside of the classroom. And I found that adults actually who are self-selecting to learn about these things are actually very interested in learning more. And many of them actually feel like they have been robbed or denied a foundational education. I hear that from so many people who follow me online or who join my book club or who come to one of my workshops or attend one of my talks, that they actually have gotten to the age of 40 and they feel like, why did nobody ever tell me any of this stuff? And then when they find that they are able to take command of some of these topics, they find that they feel much more empowered, much more hopeful about their ability to impact the future, right? When you don't understand anything, everything seems like a conspiracy theory to you. If you don't understand the foundations of science, yeah, it does just seem like there's some forces creating, government forces creating hurricanes. It's very easy to fall for misinformation if you have no inoculation of the truth. So it helps people feel a sense of agency over their own lives when they have some sort of foundational civic education. But that does not have to mean sign up for this class, pay $2,500, sit through the lectures. There are other ways of obtaining this information now. And again, as a longtime educator, I'm a proponent of teaching it in college, teaching it in high school, teaching it in elementary school. We should be doing more of that. But again, as the previous panel talked about, this is not an either or. It's not a but. We should be learning about it in school, but maybe we can learn about it as an adult. It's an and. This is a lifelong endeavor. American government is intentionally complicated. It is not simple on purpose. Something that is complicated is much more difficult to overthrow, right? It is much more difficult to create fraud in a complicated system. So to me, those are some of the thoughts I have about how I have managed to sort of draw in a willing adult audience, is making it applicable to their lives and bringing a sense of like real world humor to it.
Right, that's great. So we've heard from sort of what it looks like to do this kind of civic learning work outside the classroom, but I know, John, you've done so much to really try to bring it to higher education and K-12 throughout your career. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about some of the work you've done at SUNY and in other places too.
Sure. Thanks so much for the opportunity to join you. I wish I could be there in person. Hahrie, it's great to see you. Secretary Mattis, thank you for your service and your leadership. And Sharon, I started out as a high school social studies and civics teacher, so I could relate to a lot of what you were describing. Thanks for your creative leadership in the sector. So, one of the reasons I wanted to be the chancellor for the State University of New York is because I believe public higher education is so well positioned to strengthen the health of our civic fabric and our democracy. At SUNY, we have 64 campuses. We serve about 370,000 students in degree programs. We have a campus in every corner of the state. 95% of New Yorkers live within 30 miles of a SUNY campus. So we have a tremendous opportunity to shape civic discourse in our state. I also think public higher education is uniquely positioned to bring people together across lines of difference, folks who have different political views, different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different national origin. We can bring all those folks together and create opportunities for people to learn together, live together, work together that will help them develop deeper understanding and empathy for others, and practice the habits of good citizenship. So a few things that we're doing at SUNY as part of what I would describe as a very robust civics and service agenda. One is we are making civic discourse part of our general education requirements. So we have cross-cutting general education requirements that shape what is taught across our classes. And we've made civic discourse a part of those general education requirements, and we are working with our faculty to help them integrate civic discourse across disciplines. So whatever class you're teaching, you can develop habits of listening carefully to others, questioning your own assumptions, not just those of the folks you disagree with. The habits of reading critically, thinking critically, asking questions, the kinds of things that would prepare you to be a productive citizen. We have also identified 10 faculty fellows in civic education and engagement and civil discourse who are providing professional development for their colleagues on how to make this work in the classroom. And so it's sort of like if we could have 10 Sharons spending their time moving across the SUNY system, providing professional development to their colleagues to make this general education commitment as effective as possible. A third thing we're doing is in our recruitment, we are very focused on recruiting more veterans and military-connected students because we think that enriches the SUNY community, as well as recruiting AmeriCorps alumni who've participated in national service. And so we have hired recruiters at the system level specifically to reach out to the veteran community, military-connected community, and the AmeriCorps community. We have a number of schools of national service that are providing additional scholarships and other support for AmeriCorps alumni. We have a veterans tuition assistance law in New York that provides financial aid for veterans, and we just expanded that from combat veterans to all veterans, which we're very excited about. So we want to make sure that our campuses communicate that we value that service experience as we recruit students. A fourth thing that we're doing that I'm particularly proud of, and you'll connect with this, Hahrie, because I know we both spend a lot of time as undergraduates doing public service work. We've launched something called the Empire State Service Corps, where we have 500 SUNY students who are being paid to do 300 hours a year of public service work. It's part of our broader campaign to have an internship for every SUNY student. Our Empire State Service Corps students are providing tutoring in K-12 classrooms. They are working on environmental issues. They are serving as peer mental health counselors. They are working on food and housing insecurity on campus and in the community. They are working on nonpartisan civic engagement projects. And the state is funding this program, but because it aligns with the values of the National AmeriCorps program, the students are also eligible for AmeriCorps Education Awards. And we just had a summit with hundreds of these students, and it's just so inspiring to see how transformed they are by the service work they're doing. They're learning about the community. They're serving alongside people who are different from them. And in some cases, they're getting excited about something that may lead to a career. Some of those folks who are doing the K-12 tutoring are likely to become teachers. So we're very excited about that program. And there was tremendous interest. In 6 to 8 weeks of having the application open, we had 500 slots. We had 2,000 applications. Young people want to do service. We're now expanding that program to a summer service program as well. So we'll have 150 students who will continue their service into the summer this year. And we hope to grow that in collaboration with Governor Hochul and the legislature. The last thing I would say is I think higher ed has gotten a lot of criticism over the last few years, particularly since October 7th, for the handling of campus protests and campus climate. And I think we have a responsibility in higher ed to hear that criticism and respond to it, and to ensure that our campuses are signaling both that we're going to create safe and supportive environments for all of our students. We are not going to tolerate discrimination, harassment, anti-Semitism, or other hate, and that we're also going to be places where we respect the First Amendment and we create opportunities for rich civic discourse, debate about difficult concepts, And we have to reject the idea that you have to choose between those. You actually, I think, can do both if you bring intentionality to it. And that's certainly what we've tried to do at SUNY.
That's great. So this is so rich because I feel like we've heard examples of the work that all of you are leading, in making civic learning a reality, in the classroom, through community service and military service, through curiosity that residents in our communities might experience. But I feel like a theme that came out in a lot of what you all talked about is this tension between, on the one hand, people seem to have like a hunger, Sharon, as you were saying, for wanting to know more, wanting to find pathways to feeling like they have agency, to, Jim, as you were saying, wanting to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. But on the other hand, they come into these spaces, kind of tutored by the world around us that is polarized and divisive and has a lot of disinformation, that is, trying to force us into choices that are binary, that aren't necessarily binary, when we need to hold these kind of tensions, John, like you were describing. And as we think about this challenge of making civic learning, pluralistic civic learning, kind of real, do you all have examples of how you handled this when it came up, in like your book club or any of the discussions that you run, Sharon or Jim? I don't know, in the military, when you have these kinds of questions come up. I work at, I'm going to filibuster for a minute while you think about what you might want to say, but I'll say, I work at Johns Hopkins, and we do a lot of teaching with our students, and certainly, over the past year, but over the past few years, we've seen that all the time, where students come to us, and on the one hand, they really want to know more, and they want to feel like they can be part of a bigger project of learning about civics, about this country, about democracy. But then on the other hand, I think they come in with so many misconceptions that often it's hard to bring a group together. And so I'm just curious what some of the strategies are that you all have used. And so Sharon, may I turn to you?
I can think of a very specific example, and it actually ties to something the previous panelist was talking about, which is about Thomas Jefferson. For so long, American education has had a desire to categorize people as heroes or as villains. And I think this is sort of innate in the human brain, that it helps us feel safe if we know, is this, somebody on a white horse, or is the creepy music about to play, right? Like, it helps us to know what we're dealing with. But I think when we actually get into it, we don't have to choose. For the vast majority of people, we don't have to cast Thomas Jefferson in a villain role or in a hero role. He can be both, right? We can say, yes, he actively enslaved people. He had, we could get into the whole Sally Hemings thing. Like, there's a lot that we can say to criticize the contributions of Thomas Jefferson. That can be true, and additionally, his role in shaping the early republic cannot be overstated. This country is what it is in part because of the contributions of Thomas Jefferson. He's just one example. Most of us would like to be judged by the totality of our legacy and not by a single act that we have. So one of the ways that I talk about it all the time is, like, we can actually look at both of those things. They don't have to be in the sidebar of the textbook as, like, great American heroes, or somebody who has the villain creepy music. Somebody can be both.
Right.
And
you
that
play both music at the same time.
Yeah, both music, two horses, ride up.
Yeah.
That is something that most people have never even been given explicit permission to hold both of these truths. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? Not the one truth, both of these truths, that somebody can be both problematic and also have made great contributions.
Great. Jim or John, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I'll give you two quick examples, one higher ed one, and one from my daughter's high school that I love. So a higher ed one is that I think sometimes faculty members are a little bit reluctant about managing conversations about controversial issues in the classroom. And so one of the things we focused on with our fellows that I mentioned, our civic education fellows, is helping people develop strategies for those conversations. Sometimes it's as simple as making sure that all the students know each other's names, having time limits for how long you can talk, asking students to pose questions to each other rather than just responding with a counter argument. Really trying to understand how did the person you're talking with get to their view rather than just telling them why their view is wrong. So there are certain habits of classroom practice that we can cultivate. One great example from my daughter's high school, my daughters both went to Blair High School in Montgomery County, Maryland. And they had an assignment that they would give in 9th grade on a controversial topic. You would have to write an essay arguing for one side of that controversial topic. And you'd have to marshal your evidence in support of your thesis. And you'd also have to respond to potential counter arguments. So you write that essay, you'd submit it in 9th grade. Then in 10th grade, you would actually have to write the essay with the opposite side's view. So now your thesis is the opposite of what it was in 9th grade. And now you've got to, again, marshal the evidence, take on the counter arguments. And two things that were great about that. One is it really forced students to think carefully about the arguments and reasoning on both sides of an issue. And the other thing that was striking that my daughter told me was, not only did I learn from this assignment, but I'm different too. Like, I'm a different person. I've grown, I've changed, my views have evolved from 9th grade to 10th grade. And I could see that, I'm more conscious of that because of doing this assignment in this way in both 9th and 10th grade. And I thought that was a very powerful example. And I think we have to help people figure out, just as Sharon's describing, what are the things you do in the classroom to make civic learning stick with people.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good example. Jim, one thing that I wanted to pick up on that you had been talking about before is the importance of civic learning as being a mechanism of commitment and creating culture. And I think that's so interesting because I feel like in so much of the ways in which we talk about civics sometimes in educational settings, it's knowledge production, it's skill building, it's these different kind of things. But I feel like what I heard you talk about was that it helped create a shared sense of purpose, amongst the soldiers that you were working with. And I'm curious if you, if you think about like how did that play out? Like how was that communicated within the military, and how do you have thoughts about how it might be relevant outside of the military?
Yeah, there's a point, Hahrie, that you're not in it for yourself. One of the loneliest places you could ever be would be to not have friends around you that are going to stand by you when the chips are down. Mm-hmm. So you start with a sense of common purpose, somewhat out of survival. Certainly success on the battlefield requires a deep sense of conviction toward each other. And I think that there's almost an affection for one another that grows so strong that oftentimes when people leave the military, they feel a sense of alienation, which is widespread, I think, in our own society, across our society today. But because in their formative years as young adults, they saw a degree of shared conviction, shared sacrifice, that it leaves a much deeper hole for many of the veterans when they go off and they find that it's not out there in a lot of the communities today. It's in some, but I think the sense of loss is very strongly felt. So if there was more of a sense of shared support for this democracy, mm-hmm. that would be a common ground that you feel. I may argue like the Dickens with Sharon about something, and then she'd say, and by the way, how's your wife doing? She's sick. And I'd say, well, how's your kid doing getting into college? Let's go have a beer, a root beer for you Mormons. But my point is that we would have common ground, common respect that went over some of the things that seem to be pulling us apart today. A World War II Marine said the country doesn't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for. It just has to always be getting better. And how many countries in the middle of a war, say the Cold War, we saw the greatest advance on civil rights since 1865 during the Cold War. Very few countries are aware, like Sharon was talking about, you gotta know the good and the bad, okay. But we've raised many people today who unfortunately know every bad thing America ever did, with few of the things that make us the most admired at least until recently, and certainly the most sought after society on earth. And so I think we've got to look at the common ground you're asking about, Hahrie, and it's also one of the reasons why the military has proven to be no threat to the Republic, because it has an affection and respect for what we have here that they wouldn't even think of carrying out a revolt. And remember, the French army last time it revolted was 1961. That's not 200 years ago. I mean, even modern militaries can be a threat if they're not brought up with this common bond and a sense of deeper purpose. So to me, it's absolutely essential to a military in a democracy so it remains a protector and not a dictator to the Republic.
And maybe that's something that we can take from the military into our communities, right? This idea that I think has largely been lost, and I hear from people all the time that this idea has been lost, that if we have disagreement on politics, that by definition means we are not friends. That means that you are like deleted, blocked, unfriended, whatever. That we can't be friends if we have disagreement on politics, and it's a whole separate topic that we can get into another time. But the military is a place where that is not true. Right? And we were talking backstage that like you can believe whatever you want in the military, but you're going to act in a different way. You're going to act like you believe it. So I think this idea of exploring what draws us together, even if we disagree on something important, it doesn't mean that you then become my enemy. And I think that we are at a moment in our history where somebody with whom we disagree is automatically an enemy, and I think that is a very dangerous place to be politically.
So I know we're coming up on time, and the last question I want to ask you all is to ask each of you to kind of speak to something, Jim, that you kind of mentioned, which is that we need hope, right, alongside the challenge. And so I'm curious if you all kind of, given the experience that you've had really putting this work into practice in all these different settings, like where are the places that you think are the greatest opportunities that we have in front of us? And while you think about that, I'll say, just picking up on the conversation that we were just having, one of the places where I've been doing a lot of work recently is within evangelical megachurches, and to the point that you made, this one church that I've done a lot of work with, which is the third largest megachurch in America, it's a 35,000 person church in Ohio. They have a saying that has really stuck with me, which is this idea that belonging comes before belief. And that so much of our society, to Sharon, to put your point, kind of is structured in ways in which that put belief before belonging, right? Like first you have to show that you agree with me, and then I'm going to invite you into my social community or whatever, or we're going to be friends or whatever. And their point is, their church, they have certain things that they stand very explicitly for and they believe in, but that no matter what you believe, you're a welcome part of our community, so you belong to us. And I think that's a little bit, Jim, kind of I think what I heard you saying, and that's something that I sort of feel like one opportunity that I have is in all the settings that I work in, and make sure that we're creating communities that put belonging before belief. But anyways, I'd love to give each of you a chance to think about where you think the opportunities are to take this kind of civic learning that we've all been talking about and really expand it in the future.
Well, first of all, John, I used to teach in Montgomery County at a high school not very far from where your daughters went. It's a great school. But I think one of the things that I try to teach people is that hope is not based on your external circumstances. That if you look at, what reason would George Washington have had to feel hope, right? What hope was evident before his eyes, right? Like I'm supposed to take this ragtag volunteer army in need of a shower and defeat a global superpower. Like that's what I'm supposed to do. What evidence would I have that that's even possible? And I really think it's important for us to think about the idea that hope is a set of actions. Hope is a choice that we make. It is an orientation of our spirit. It helps us align our actions with what we want to see happen in the world. It is not a feeling that we are waiting to experience.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love that. John, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Look, I think, we have so many heroes among us, and if we could help young people connect with those models, I think we could inspire the kind of hope that Sharon is describing. I went to a funeral yesterday of Hazel Dukes, who was the leader of the New York NAACP for decades. She was 92. When you think about when she grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. She grew up in a deeply segregated America with tremendous restrictions on opportunities for people of color. And she spent her whole life pressing for a more just society, for expanding the circle of opportunity for African Americans, for women. And Secretary Clinton spoke at the funeral, Governor Hochul spoke at the funeral, Reverend Sharpton. It was deeply inspiring to think about that in her life, she saw so much progress, which wasn't to say that she didn't see lots of things to be frustrated by, but she saw tremendous progress and always believed that America could be better. And I want young people to have an appreciation for those stories and to get to live it a little bit by doing service themselves. And that's one of the reasons I love the Service Corps work that we're doing at SUNY, and why I believe so deeply in AmeriCorps and what they're trying to achieve. If students have that experience, making a difference, contributing to somebody else's life, making things a little bit better through their own efforts, I think we can instill in them exactly the kind of hope that Sharon describes.
That's great. Thank you. Jim, I think you get the last word.
Well, your point, belonging before belief, that's in the Marines, we call everybody green. In other words, if there's two guys named Smith in the unit, one black, one white, you'd say, is it light green Marine or dark green Marine? That you're referring to, the Smith. And my point is the shared coming in, proud of who you are, all forever proud, but once in, there's something that draws you together that nothing will draw a line between you. And we did set up a difficult form of government on purpose after our nasty argument with King George III. We didn't want any more of that kind of stuff. But it requires us to think about it and to get it right in terms of our education, because it is the worst form of government except for all the rest we've tried in this world, and it's not easy. So if we can somehow get it across to people that it's fun to master this form of government because it allows you a degree of liberation, of freedom, of yourself, of your friends, no matter what circumstance you're in. A guy can actually get thrown into jail in Birmingham, Alabama without a reference book around and scribble out on a piece of paper a letter that lives on to this day, thanks to the civics education grounded in history that he had been given. He doesn't have a reference book in there, and Martin Luther King writes that letter to this day, says, calls on America to listen to its better angels, not its ugly side. And everything has an ugly side. Even the moon has a dark side. So to somehow use it as a way of liberating people, most people like freedom. I mean, people died for that throughout history. They're still doing it right now in Ukraine. So certainly we can find that level of motivation, as long as, like a Nightingale song, you can tweet it out to them. They'll react. I've dealt with young people for decades. They'll react.
Great. Well, thank you all for your leadership and your important leadership in this work, and thank you all for joining us on this panel. So please join me.
Thank you.